describe what were some of those conditions that you were talking about with Brian to allow him to lift through all this rehabilitation process in order for him to come back stronger, fitter, faster?
Yes. Well, really, he didn't lift in the beginning. It's a matter, just as you described with your footballer, you built the foundation for pain-free movement later, and that's what we did. So when you rehabilitate an athlete, when I study why athletes fail to recover, and those are the ones I get. I mean, I only get the ones who've got back troubles and they've failed other approaches. So I'm sort of the last hope for many of them. But it's a two-stage process. Number one, we perform an assessment, very thorough assessment, so we really understand the mechanism of their pain, and then we get rid of that. So in Brian's case, of course, it was heavy load and poor movement form. See, pain is a terrible corrupter of movement patterns. Here was someone who had excellent lifting form. He'd squatted well over 1,000 pounds. I forget what his deadlift was, but it was ungodly. It was the best in the world in that weight division. But when you get pain, you know, if you have a pain in your foot, you limp. Well, if you're a lifter and you've got back pain, you do strange things all day long with this corruption of the pain. So it was a matter of repatterning his daily movements just to take the load off so he could create a training capacity. You know, he'd just throw himself onto the floor and do some exercises thinking that would assist. And again, it wasn't his fault. He was disgusted with himself, not understanding why he is in so much pain. And again, this was before the assessment to really understand what the mechanism was. But to focus the answer, it's stage one, get rid of the cause and move in a way that doesn't cause pain. This allows neurologically a desensitization of the whole pain process. So what was triggering pain a month ago is no longer triggering pain. Neurally, they've raised that trigger level, so to speak. We don't talk about performance training in that first stage. It's all about desensitizing the system, taking the offending loads away, etc. Then when they're out of pain, we shift into the second stage, which is now, what does that athlete need for the foundation of whatever their athletic performance is? Obviously, the book was focused on load bearing and the strength athlete. We would do a different one if I was to do a UK Premier League footballer, for example. But anyway, that's so lifting. That didn't really come in until stage two. But that very much was building a core of iron, unleashing his hips, but not too much mobility in the hips. A power lifter has what we call tuned mobility. In other words, we want them to work a little bit to get right down into the lifter's wedge, so that tight passive tissues are allowing and assisting the upward thrust of the movement together with muscle. We don't want to stretch them out, so to speak. And I think too many trainers do too much mobility on certain athletes. Or if we had a jumper or a high jumper or someone like that, we try and keep the hamstrings as tight as possible, which again would sound very odd to some people. But those are just examples of how we would tune in that stage too.
And as we, I guess, move on into the book a little further, you start going into the actual programming part, and we start seeing some of the the exercises that you've asked, some of the mobility drills that you've asked Brian to go through various images and so on and so forth. And now you've mentioned some of the like the stages with regards to reducing the pain and then building the core. What kind of I guess exercises might be included in that, and why might they be used? Because you talk about core stiffness and control, core endurance, and sufficient mobility. So what kind of exercises are going to be building those elements of someone's fitness and of someone's body?
Right. Well, we get out a pencil and paper and we write down what does this person need as a foundation to perform. And in Brian's case, not only did we need more core stiffness, but we also needed drills to regroove some of those movement patterns back once again. So obviously, to start off core stiffness, there's nothing better than the big three exercises, which is the bird dog, the side plank, and the modified curl up. Or we can move very quickly to various forms of the front plank. And people think, well, what's a big power lifter doing a bird dog exercise? As an example. Well, we've trialed this several different times. I'll give you one example of a study I did with Ben Lee with Muay Thai fighters and then non-fighters as sort of the control group, I guess. And we would train them doing the big three, and it adds core stiffness that stays a little bit longer. So if you were performing a hand strike or a punch, in other words, or a leg strike, a kick, if you can stiffen the core, the power that is developed about the hip drives the leg with a higher velocity and more power than if the spine was allowed to bend, which would be an energy leak in that particular case. So we found that the fighters were striking harder when they had more core stiffness to propel the leg, as an example. Kicking a football or a soccer ball is exactly the same thing. When you measure the great ones, they hardly look as though they're trying very hard at all. But what they do is they unleash the leg. It swings through like a pendulum. But when the foot hits the ball, they have core stiffness, which really adds more power into the ball, and the ball just flies through the air. They make it look so easy, but it is with the core stiffness. So getting back to Brian, that foundation was non-negotiable. And then we had movement drills to drill in hip mobility so that he could utilize the newfound core stiffness. And then the real trick to strength is what I'll refer to as neural drive. So muscles contract, obviously, because of nerve impulses, but let's follow that whole mechanism. The foundation of strength is really the mind, and the mind is where the origination of the nerve impulses come from. So they're formed in the motor cortex. Well, there are tricks to create very dense neural drive, strength of thought, etc. You have to be in an emotional state. You want to be borderline fight or flight. All of these things. And then you send out as dense a strength thought as you can. Well, the next part is more anatomical. You've got to get the nerves to carry as much electricity, to be gross about it, or to carry as many nerve impulses as you possibly can. And there we would use grinding exercises. A bench press, for example, is an ideal grinding exercise because it's with proper form, You can adapt it so it's not very hard on the back when a person is in that early stage of performance training. But they work the sticking point. They learn how to think more strength, carry and grind through the sticking point, and using tricks like spread the bar, squeeze the bar, bend the bar, create small pulses in the legs, and through core stiffness allow that to propagate through, to pulse through the sticking points. Anyway, there's just a little bit of an essay on densifying neural drive. So that was all part of Brian's program as well. And of course, he knew all these things as the former champ. We just needed to overcome the corruption that had taken place in his thought patterns and neurology to really regain that strength once again.